Should we make a start? Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody to this CloudCoCo webinar. Great to have you on the call with us, whether you're now live or whether you are watching on catch up later on social media or YouTube or wherever else this is going to go out on. My name is Mark Wainwright, and my role within CloudCoCo is to support our customers by talking to them about and explaining about how to protect their organizations from the ongoing, increasing and inevitable security threats. It is with that inevitability in mind that I'm joined today by Darktrace's Elliot Stocker. And as we chat through what is currently happening in the IT security landscape, and hopefully we're going to offer a few suggestions and some thoughts about how you can be better prepared to deal with the inevitability of a security incident. Elliot, it is great to have you with me. I am also joined, you'll see him there, hopefully on your left, by CloudCoCo's Head of Marketing, Peter Naylor. Afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Peter has recently found the run poll options within Teams. So I'm going to be getting him involved later on, and we're going to run a number of in-webinar polls for everybody who's here live to be able to get some of your thoughts as well. Looking forward to seeing how he works with that. But before we'll do more of that as we go along. And if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask as we go through, you feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to those towards the latter parts of the session. And also coming later, for those who are also on live, is a prize draw of £100 for a more CoCo voucher from our CoCo store. The CoCo store is CloudCoCo's online store, and it is a great place to get a myriad of techie stuff from and at great prices. The prize draw is coming up at the end of this webinar. Peter is going to be running that, so make sure you hang around for that later on as well. You know, the security conversations that I have with customers, particularly those that are customer-led, are generally focused around dealing with the risk of ransomware and how that can be avoided. All the statistics that we read about point to the problem getting worse, becoming more widespread, and becoming more complex and more sophisticated methods being used to trick the user into doing something that they don't want to do. And that inevitability causes organizations hassle that they don't want to have. It costs money as well trying to resolve it. And in the age-old concept of prevention is better than a cure, CloudCoCo have continued to present options to our customers about how to prevent a security incident from like this taking place. One of those ways is to look at the deployment of solutions. And it is, I guess, my privilege this afternoon to welcome Elliot from Darktrace to chew the cud with me about how Darktrace can help customers to stop that inevitability of a security incident from taking place and to prevent the damage that they would look to cause. And so welcome, Elliot. Thank you for joining with me this afternoon. Why don't you just take a moment or two just to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. Hey, Peter. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Elliot Stocker. I studied machine learning in my master's degree, and I've been at Darktrace now for 2 years, for 18 months as part of the commercial teams, so helping numerous organizations of various sizes, actually, between the UK and Benelux, deploy artificial intelligence to bolster their cybersecurity posture. And I'm now in the product team, and I'm appearing today as product expert to share some of the stories, tips, and some of the predictions that hopefully you will find useful.
That's great, Elliot. Well, I am looking forward to having this chat with you. But before we get on to Darktrace, and obviously we will cover a little bit more about Darktrace, about how it works and what it does and why it's different, can we just cover the current threat landscape? Because things have changed greatly. Since I started in security just over 20 years ago, although I know that I don't look old enough to have been around for that long. Certainly, well, I don't think so anyway. And of course, over the last 3 years, there's been this kind of seismic shift in the way that we all operate within day to day. So what have you been noticing yourself over the last, say, 12 months in that kind of regard?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it'll be no surprise to our audience today that every year the landscape predictions and current threat trends change quite a bit. And that tends to be in response to the way the new normals that we go through, whether it's digital transformation, remote working as a result of COVID, or now cloud adoption. One of the things that really always surprises me, so I thought I'd mention, is the fact that the Department of Justice in the US puts ransomware at the same level as terrorism, which really makes what we do feel extremely important, actually. Focusing a little bit on the types of threats we're seeing, I think the speed of attacks is something that everyone has heard a lot about. But to give you a bit of an example, I think it was Splunk that did a categorization of ransomware strains, and the fastest one, I think it was Lockbit, but I might be wrong on that. The fastest one could encrypt 100,000 files a minute.
Okay.
So when you consider that kind of speed, at Darktrace, we have the saying, you don't bring a human to a machine fight. And that sort of sets the scene for why we're talking today about using technology to augment human teams. It's not about putting them aside, but just to augment them to be able to stay in the fight. One of the direct impacts of the remote working policies is having sort of distributed environments and having a lot more remote connections in. So we saw a lot of RDP brute forcing or RDP being exploited, new doors into the organization that were opened as a result of having to be more flexible and accommodating for people working from home, for example. To touch on ransomware specifically, we've obviously, I'm sure everyone's heard double extortion ransomware, which is not just about encryption and then ransom demand. There's a step before that of data exfiltration to put a bit more pressure on the organization for the ransom or other nefarious purposes. And we've even had cases of, seen cases in the wild rather of, backups being encrypted first or deleted altogether. Ransomware as a service is on the rise as well. The interesting note for me thing to bear in mind about ransomware as a service is it's actually a Gartner analyst that was positioning this. Having ransomware become more of a business means that you have this split between ransomware operators and ransomware developers. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind because you have a sort of task force of people, ransomware developers, whose sole job is to ensure that the malware they create or the software they create gets through defenses. And so they'll test it against off-the-shelf security products and things like that. And then they loan it out to a ransomware operator who will execute and then or sort of share the benefits. So that's an important thing to bear in mind, that there's lower barriers to entry for people who can just operate because they no longer have to code the ransomware themselves, basically, or buy it off the dark web. And there's ransomware developers continuously pushing the boundaries. There's just a couple of other things that I want to mention, but sorry, did you want to jump in, Mark?
Yeah, let's come on to ransomware just in a moment or two, and I do want to pick up that theme with you. But because the risks are increasing, and because we hear so much more about different organizations being hit by ransomware and different security threats, are you seeing organizations increasingly concerned about that, or are we still in a position where people are kind of a little bit nonchalant? It's not going to happen to me, type of thing. It's if a security incident is going to happen, it's going to be a big boy that's going to get hit with that. Is that still a view that you're seeing?
Well, so that's actually a brilliant way to tie into the next point I wanted to raise about the threat landscape, which is hacktivism, right? Which we've seen a lot of in the news this year. And the traditional response to that is kind of, well, I'm not the target, they'll focus on the big fish kind of thing, as you rightly said. And I was just reading up on this earlier to refresh my memory, but the Maersk NotPetya ransomware incident, that was collateral damage. That was not the initial target. And that's something that can definitely happen and sort of spill over. So thinking, that the primary target is sort of fair enough, but there is, with the rise of the lower barriers of entry and the rise of the actors in the space, there is an increased chance of being the second or third victim, and therefore somehow collateral damage. To your point, though, I do feel that over the sort of the tail end of last financial year, I mean by that, it was a lot easier for IT leaders to bring the conversation to the board about bolstering, defense as someone who would have antivirus firewall, and maybe some sort of intrusion prevention system, who was like, I need more depth in my defense in depth strategy. I need more layers to my security onion, if you will. And the conversation seemed to be easier at the top. Now, this will obviously come to a bit of a squeeze with the new economic situation, but we'll get to that in our predictions part.
Okay, that's great. Well, let's just think about some of the risks that are in play with security incidents, and I'm going to hand over to Peter at this point. We're going to test his in-poll webinar stuff to see how this works. Peter, over to you for the first poll.
Okay, no problem. That should have loaded up on everyone's screens if my magic has worked. So first question for everyone, which of the following carries the highest business risk for you? So if you just select one of them from the list and hit submit when you're ready.
I suppose you and I, Mark, we don't submit an answer.
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Just give it a few more seconds to let the answers come in. Okay, we've got some good ones in there. Okay.
That's good. So what does that look like then, Peter?
No problem. So up at 36%, we've got sensitive data, potentially IP. We've got a 27% inability to transact for a few days, 18% credibility being impacted, and 9% production paralyzed, and 9% is other. Please share in the chat. So if anyone does have anything to share there, please put it into the chat.
So Elliot, just looking at those results there, and I guess the percentages that's referenced, not one at 36%, but the rest falling on quite quickly behind. There's not one particular risk area that kind of everybody's focused on. Is that kind of indicative? Is ransomware, does it transcend a whole lot of different issues, and therefore that's where it becomes, I guess, even more concerning, that it affects some people in different ways?
Well, I mean, if you take double extortion ransomware, it ticks all of those boxes. So it could explain why we have this spread, right? Because whether it's production or inability to transact, in both cases, we're talking about a systems paralysis, right? Whether it's IT systems or OT systems or industrial control systems. Talking about sensitive data exfiltration, that's usually in the double extortion ransomware attack. That's the step before encryption, right? We're taking away something that we're going to be able to use to as leverage on the company in order to try and get a ransom. And then finally, obviously, the loss of credibility. That's the whole managing the aftermath of a ransomware attack, and obviously disclosure and how you deal with it and things like that. So yeah, actually, ransomware kind of ties all of them together.
Okay, and I guess then with ransomware, the attacks we're told from a whole lot of sources that ransomware attacks are kind of increasing. That combined with the complexity and sophistication is causing issues. I mean, I remember having an email to say I'd been caught speeding in Swinton, which is Greater Manchester area, and I was like, I've not been in Swinton. I've not been around that area. And, I could click on the link to find a picture evidence of me speeding. And before I clicked it, didn't click it before. I think maybe that's just a risk to be able to click it. I haven't been there, but we're seeing greater sophistication of attacks coming through. I'm sure. Is again from Darktrace's perspective, is that what you're seeing? It's not the please log into a bank account that you've never had before, or speeding, or some of the other type of phishing tools.
Well, actually, from a non-Darktrace perspective, just individually, I had a what's it called, vishing now, I think, a phishing text, which was very convincing. Actually, it inserted itself in the stream of texts from Revolut. So above this text were texts of like, your sister requested this amount to pay, or previous codes for when you forget your password, kind of thing. So I obviously believed it. And they got me to call a guy who was from the UK, from the northern part of the UK. It sounded very legit to be Revolut. And it's only when they started asking for the 4-digit passcode to the PIN to log into the app that you sort of like, well, hang on. And actually, we can tie this back into sort of ransomware and how Darktrace deals with this in particular, because that question of, can I have your PIN? That was one signal. In an otherwise perfectly executed plan, there was one signal of, well, this is suspicious. This is not normal. I've been on calls like this before. This is weird. And actually, we'll get into it in a bit. But in handling sort of how Darktrace picks up on ransomware, and more importantly, how it picks up on it at an early stage, we're talking about identifying signals of unusual, suspicious behavior, and how a few of those put together can really make a strong case of there's something fishy going on, pun intended. You should go and have a look. If we break down a ransomware attack, usually it's quite a fun exercise to do. If you have a room with 10 people and you say, okay, give me one word, what does ransomware mean to you? 8 out of 10 will say ransom. But ransom is actually just the last 5% of a ransomware attack. As we were saying earlier, there's a number of stages that an attacker has to go through before being able to demand a ransom. Previously, we've obviously got data encryption. And so the kind of signals we're looking for there are, are there large volumes of files that are being written with a potential extension, like a help decrypt extension is something that we've seen often, and things like that. So there's a signal there. So one question that our audience can ask themselves as I work backwards through a ransomware attack is sort of, do I have something that could pick up on this or alert me to this, or how could I find out this is going on? Before data encryption, we've got data exfiltration in the case of our double extortion attack, where obviously the attacker is going to try and stage as much data on likely a compromised device, preparing it for exfiltration either via a cloud platform when they log off the VPN, or we've seen data exfiltration come out of CCTV cameras, just very small uploads, but over a long period of time. I was trying to find another example. Thermometers, smart thermometers is another thing we've seen. So IoT devices, unmanaged devices, things like that. So that's another question to ask is, can I see data that's going out of my organization? And it's not just about my, DLP tool, that's data loss protection, saying, if these files are sent out by email, block it somehow. It's more about, can I identify an unusual amount of data going out? Before data exfiltration, the attacker is going to try and move into a position of power, right? That's where we have the whole lateral movement, privilege escalation, things like that. And again, at that point, the question you want to be asking is, can I see if someone is moving from one device to the other when they shouldn't be, because the users, have certain, we call them patterns of life at Darktrace. You can think of them as patterns of normal behavior, basically. So can I see these hops or the raising the bar in terms of admin credentials and rights and things like that? Because that's a good indicator of someone staging themselves to be in a position to execute an attack. And then winding all the way back to the start of the attack, we've got that whole initial infection, which I'll touch on in a second, and the establishing the foothold. So once someone's bitten, so once the hook has caught something, how do I make sure I persist and I can have access there? And so at that point, we're looking at, can you pick up on your endpoint devices that are beaconing out, for example? So sending a beacon at varying regularities. To an external host that no one else in the organization is contacting? Is it able to detect it when, you might have, for example, some beaconing detection tools that'll say, well, okay, if I see an outgoing connection every 30 seconds or every 30 minutes, block it. But what happens if, it sends a beacon in 1 minute, the next one in 7 minutes, the following one in 37 minutes, attackers are always trying to innovate like that to break the patterns that rules use to detect threats. So that's another way to think about it, is how rigid is my net of detection, right? So how small are the holes in my net, or how big are they?
So I guess, Elliot, what you're saying is that there are telltale signs that you can look for and to identify a ransomware attack before it's actually become encrypted.
That's absolutely right. So at every stage, there is something that a defender would not do. And by defender, I mean someone in the defending the victim organization, right? Encrypting 100,000 files, that's unlikely someone needs to do that for their day-to-day job, right? Yeah. And that kind of stuff. So picking up on these signals is key. And more importantly, than just picking up on one signal in isolation, what's key is being able to see the whole map, if you will, of these little signals from across the infrastructure. And that could be in your IT environment on the endpoints, but it could also, one stage of the attack could be in Microsoft 365. Another stage of the attack could be in a production environment. Or on legacy systems and things like that. And I gave you the example of sort of CCTV cameras and things like that. So, internet connected light bulbs and things like that. So having a full picture of the digital environment, a solid understanding of, what's normal and what should be going on, helps to identify what's sticking out as a potential issue. And just to finish on the whole sort of ransomware line, we backpedal all the way to the initiation, where we have, our account takeovers, our phishing emails, which are still 93, 94% of cyber attacks start there. The RDPs of exploitation to go in. So any sort of first point of compromise. And again, there we're looking at things like, okay, if someone is logging into a SaaS sort of a cloud application from a weird location, if that's one signal, weird location, what else are they doing? It's not just about picking up when something unusual's happened, because if you have a sales guy that logs into Teams from 3 different countries every week, it's going to be a nightmare for the security team. So it's also about context. That's why I said this full picture is important, because if it's just a weird login, it's probably not that much of an issue. If it's a weird login followed by email rules being created, or access to sensitive files, and we know it's sensitive because no one else really looks at them, that kind of stuff are the signals that we should be looking at. Okay,
that's interesting. I guess for the rest of us that are not looking at the ones and zeros and the screens, the phishing attack is, as you said, 93-94% of where ransomware comes from. And a partner that we work with on phishing and phishing campaigns, they suggest that the average is about 30 to 33% click rate on emails that's coming through. And so this is a question that Pete will bring you back in to do another poll about, which is how confident we would be that people within our organizations will be able to spot an attack from when that comes through via an email. That's the question, Peter, was it?
Yeah, that's right. It should be on everyone's screens now. It's choose between 1 and 5 stars.
We give this, so 1 is you're not very confident, and 5 is you are super confident nothing would ever get through. Yeah.
I'll just give that a few more seconds. Results come in.
I'm changing, so that's what, 3.2 on average, 3.2 out of 5. So what, 64%, what's just got up, 66%. I guess that's probably in line, isn't it, with 33% click rate of what we'd expect. It's not very good, that is it, Elliot? Is that not?
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I think if it's not less than 1%, then the danger exists. I think that's the way to look at it, right? One email is all it takes to get in. Now, obviously, a lot of emails fail for that one email to work. So it's not just one email, but one successful phishing email, one employee entering credentials can be the start of something that sort of avalanches, snowballs into something much bigger.
So I guess that the idea really is then that we need to reduce the potential of that one email coming through, and the more we can do to prevent that means that the users are not going to be, can we say, tricked into clicking a link or to giving information away.
Yeah, I think that's the key concept, right? If you have a vendor that approaches you saying we can reduce and eliminate the risk of cyber disruption, then you should probably send them on their way, because I don't think there is such a thing as eliminating, but you can take steps to risk reduction. And in fact, the conversation now is about what are the quantum leaps I can take in order to, for one step, take the biggest reduction in risk, in cyber risk. And about, the human, it's not so much about making them superheroes at detecting phishing. It's about reducing the volume so that in the one or two instances where something fishy comes in, they actually have the processing power to notice that, it's funny, the sender address is not the same one that appears when I hover my mouse over it, or just to have those reflexes that you teach them through security awareness. But if you have 500 emails a day, there's just no way that you're going to hover your mouse over every sender. So it's about really reducing that volume and doing it in an efficient way that doesn't also hinder legitimate business, right? You don't want the IT team to be releasing emails constantly either, because the gateway is too severe. And obviously the other way around, you don't want lots of phishing emails coming through.
So the way that we would traditionally look at doing that and reducing down the amount of emails coming through and limiting that, notwithstanding the security awareness training that users can have to be able to spot these things for themselves when they inevitably will come through. But the ways that we used to do that was with more traditional methods of protection. But the way that I understand the threat landscape changing is that the ways that we used to do security are no longer completely sufficient to the ways that we need to be able to defend against the type of threats that's coming through. I mean, 20 years ago, if we had a firewall and we had a bit of antivirus on our endpoints, you were pretty much secure. 20 years have passed, and you wouldn't just have those two things anymore as part of your security posture. There's an increasing number of vectors that you've got to be able to protect against. So I guess why is it no longer sufficient just to be able to have a firewall and an intrusion prevention and a bit of proxy and a bit of endpoint?
I think that's a really good point you raised there. I think one way we can think about it is just in terms of from 20 years ago, as you said, the weight that the opposing side, so to say, has sort of garnered. We touched on ransomware developers as a separate entity to ransomware operators earlier, and it's really that pace of innovation on the attacking side is really something that we now have to face. And one way to understand sort of the transition and the evolution of security postures and security stacks is actually to look in tandem at the evolution of attacks and sort of how we responded, because it's been a really reactive game actually so far. So back in the day when your antivirus was your main port of call for cybersecurity, we had an attack. An organization got infected. There was a victim. There was a forensic analysis. You could take the signature from the malware and you could plug it into a tool that would scan basically everything. And if you had a one-to-one match with that signature, you'd block it. And that worked well to catch all those known threats, right? All the ones that are exactly the same as the ones previously. But then obviously as those started getting caught on the attacking side, they started to innovate and try to find new ways in, or versions of the same malware that's slightly tweaked so it doesn't get blocked by a one-to-one connection, and things like that. Or for the example of ransomware, it's a whole different step that's added into the attack with double extortion, and sort of the data exfiltration bit. And so in response to that, what we sort of came up with as a security community is the rules-based approach, right? Where we're looking at either a known type of attack or a known attacker, a known actor. And so it's not as precisely and tightly defined as signatures, but it's a bit more open. So again, this idea of the extending the net to catch more of those things, we're making it a bit looser. And so an example of the rules-based one, as a response to double extortion ransomware, you'll put a rule in your firewall that if you see, I don't know, if 2 gigabytes was the most commonly seen exfiltration volume during a ransomware attack, then you'd put a rule in your firewall saying, if you see an data leaving above 2 gigabytes, block it. Obviously, when this gets picked up by the attacker, they start to morph their methods to sort of take advantage of the weakness of rules-based, which is the automation, which is still quite rigid. It's not as rigid as one-to-one signature matching, but it's still quite rigid, because you're saying 2 gigabytes for every device. 2 gigabytes of data going out is the threshold for every device, kind of thing. And on the attacking side, they will start doing things like varying the volume of data leaving, or getting it to leave in smaller amounts via a CCTV camera, where it's much harder to put any sort of protection software on there. We have one of our executives at Darktrace loves to use the example of an internet-connected light bulb, because he just tries to tap a CD onto it and says, well, you can't really put any protection software on there. And in terms of all that sort of flexibility and new methodology they're using on the attacking side, our response was to leverage AI. Now we've gone 38 minutes without mentioning AI yet, so I think that's pretty good. Let's touch on it now, where basically machine learning is used in some cases to supercharge rules, right? So I'll give you an example. You feed a machine learning algorithm 100,000 phishing emails that we've seen in the wild. It's going to be able to pick up really quickly. That's the promise of AI, right? Speed and scale, the two things we lack in human teams. It's going to learn really quickly over those 100,000 emails what are the subtle signals that this is a phishing email. And then you put that, you run every new email incoming through that, and if there's any signals that resembles those 100,000 phishing emails, we'll be able to pick up on it. Now that's pretty good, right? That's a pretty solid approach, and that our net is even looser when we do that. But say we're back in February 2020, and you get a phishing email that's talking about COVID-19. It's the first one we've ever seen. It's never been used before. It's never been spoken of before. It didn't exist before. Well, November. Anyway, the details, the phishing email, let's focus on that, not the contentious topic. Any sort of new threats, and that's why we talk a lot about unknown unknowns in this sort of security sphere, and a lot of the work we do at Darktrace is about those unknown unknowns. So how can I pick up, a threat that we've never before seen that I can't possibly automate a rule for beforehand? how can I pick up on Mark, who's, sadly clicked on a phishing link and entered his credentials, and now the attacker is in my environment with credentials? How can I detect that, and how can I respond to that if it's not on my perimeter anymore, it's already inside? So that's a sort of key to understanding why Darktrace is going one step further. And it's really changing I guess this is the right time to transition and explain a little bit how it works. It's really changing the sort of the base layer, the input that drives the security approach. And that's why it's a great thing to have on your outer layers of your security onion, because you have a host of tools that are looking at historical attack data, right? Either for one-to-one matching, like your antivirus, or for inspiration on what might come later. And that's what, using machine learning to derive signals from that. What Darktrace is doing instead is we deploy wherever the organization has data. And the idea is to build up an understanding of normal behavior. So I alluded to patterns of life earlier. And that's the cornerstone of what we do. We use self-learning AI that's going to continuously adapt the understanding of normal. What that's going to allow to do is pick up any subtle anomaly, any subtle deviation from that said pattern of life. And as I alluded to earlier, it's not about just then bombarding these to the security team, because if you have a sales guy traveling, you don't want them to be bombarded with alerts. Alert fatigue is a big deal, or ticket fatigue is a big deal, and it's something that we work to reduce. And so that's why we have an additional module that's going to replicate the work of a human SOC analyst, but again, at the speed and scale of AI. And what that means is that in real time, you have something that's able to investigate the whole infrastructure and identify if anything else has a link to this one weird login, or if it is indeed just an isolated event. And this happens over time. So if, in a couple of days, something else pops up that relates to this incident, we'll be able to stitch that together, because that's how we see a lot of attacks are sort of low and slow, trying to evade tools by not making too much noise initially. Just to finish on sort of Darktrace, so we're detecting any anomaly. We're doing a whole investigation work, replicating the work of the human SOC analyst to identify if this is a threat, and if it is, present it in a very easy to understand report to the team. And that's really useful for smaller teams, when there's 1, 2, 5 guys in the IT team, when cybersecurity is not the sole focus. Just having that, okay, something's happened, here's the full report. You can go and investigate. Or one step further, Darktrace created autonomous response, which is basically the ability for the machine to fight back autonomously. And basically, the actions themselves are not the sophistication behind it. So, it's going to be lock an account, or lock a link in an email, or withhold the email altogether, or block connections between devices. The sophistication is in understanding the sort of limit of acceptable behavior for everyone, and what that normal pattern of life is, so that I can allow everything that's normal while blocking everything that's abnormal in the case of a threat. And that's a big deal, especially for our audience who talked about being unable to perform transactions and sort of the paralysis ensued. We don't want a tool that at the first sign of trouble is going to quarantine the device and lock you down. You want a measure of proportionate response, right? And surgical response. How can I block just one connection from one IP to one IP over a specific port, rather than putting a whole device sort of in the sin bin for the day?
Okay, that's interesting, because my understanding of things like defense in depth and that kind of framework or strategy is that you've got different types of defensive layers are needed in order to be able to give you depth. So the reason why we don't all have 4 or 5 different antiviruses on our devices is for that reason. Yeah, so they'd all block, or the first one would block everything, or you would end up having everything getting through, because everything's looking at the same same type of threat. So I guess what you're saying here is, in order to deliver a defense in depth framework or strategy, you need to have different solutions that are looking at different things rather than looking for the same things and operating in a different way. So you talk about having the unknown unknowns there, whereas other solutions like intrusion prevention, for instance, would be more signature driven. So we've seen this before. We know what's bad, therefore we'll block what's bad, but we don't know if it's bad if we've not already seen it yet. So you're looking at that kind of behavioral view of what this could be, even though we don't know that it is yet.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And I think you're absolutely right that the whole idea of defense in depth, if you have 8 tools doing the same thing, then the arrow will shoot straight through all 8 of them, right? And that's what the real cornerstone that I want our audience to take away from today about Darktrace is self-learning AI that learns normal for the enterprise, for the organization. Sorry, that's the real key behind all of this. Because, as I said, after 38 minutes, we hadn't talked about AI. I'm sure our audience has heard AI being mentioned just about by every security vendor out there. And an important question to ask when someone says AI is, okay, well, there's sort of 3, you can vulgarly break it down into 3, right? What goes in, what's being done, and what's the planned output? What's it trying to do? So if you have the 100,000 phishing email one, for example, you're looking at a sample of 100,000 phishing emails we've seen before. The objective is to identify signals to block that from emails coming in. When you're doing that, you inherit the weaknesses or the vulnerabilities, for lack of a better term, of the data set you train it on, right? That's why there's a lot of contentious subjects about AI in other domains, because it inherits the weaknesses of the data set. Now, if the AI data set is what your normal operations looks like, that's bespoke to you, right? That's fitted to you. And we're not trying to have the best prediction of how an attack is going to get in. We're just trying to have a best understanding of what you are so that what you are not, we're in a position to highlight it, and if necessary, disarm and contain it.
Okay. Now, one of the conversations that I have in the course of my role is with customers frequently when they're looking, or when we're looking to take something proactively to them by way of another solution, is that they're not sure whether it's for them, or they might think, this is going to be too difficult to be able to build a business case, or perhaps they've got some other solutions in place which they assume is going to cover some of the same attack vectors, and therefore they think that it's not needed. So given that, and given those maybe objections, if you want to call them that, or areas of concern, what would your response be to those people?
First, fair enough. Second, I get it, right? You're not gonna just suddenly throw a live AI tool in your environment just because some guy says it's a good idea. The way in which Darktrace operates is because we understand where we're talking about a whole new space of threat, a whole new technology vision. And notably, I'll touch on the Cyber AI loop, which is an extension, in a second. But we're talking about something completely new. And because of that, we understand that it's not just about telling you, it's about showing you. And so that's why Darktrace has this really generous proof of value trial, we call it, which is basically a 30-day trial where you can see the AI in action in your environment. And what you're going to see there is the AI modeling those normal relationships, and starting to show you some of the abnormalities that we're picking up on, some of the things that either the AI hasn't seen before, and so it's highlighting, or that you are just thinking, well, this shouldn't be going on. And with the response module, it'll even step up and start saying, well, this is a strange connection. I would have blocked it. We're obviously not doing, anything, putting anything live. It's all in passive mode. But what that does is it enables the sort of security team, of course, if they like the solution, to start gathering data on like, oh, but look, we've been able to control for all these events. And I can tell you that there's only 2 incidents. I can confidently say that. Or I can confidently say that there's no way of getting from this device to that device. That's all part of our sort of prevent space, which I'll touch on if we have a bit of time. The idea of the proof of value is you really have 30 days where you can derive insights from the AI and show what not only what it what it enables you to do within the solution, but also the amount of time it saves. Because when we're talking about, going from 40,000 abnormal behaviors and alerts down to, 3 or 4 investigated incidents that the human team can look at, it's not just about how quickly you're able to solve this incident and come to a conclusion or a remediation if necessary. It's also about the amount of time we've freed up to do other things, strategic tasks, for example, like an alert coming in might highlight, oh, I didn't know that we had this IT configuration. I think I should put a policy in place, rather than the sort of the hand-to-hand combat firefighting mode that is cybersecurity sometimes. So I think that's the best way is to sort of like consider what a proof of value could bring you, and then that we help to show. And obviously bringing the CIO or CEO on board to look at the interface, to have a visual representation of your entire digital infrastructure right there in one single pane of glass always has a bit of a wow effect, and can sort of help with those conversations.
Okay, so the opportunity arises then for any organization who wants to look a little bit deeper at Darktrace to actually deploy this within their own environment, to be able to see what it would give in a real production environment if it was deployed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea is really not just, we want it to be as low friction as possible. I think for our email and apps coverage, it's something that takes between 5 and 10 minutes for our engineers to install completely, to spin up. For sort of covering the network or industrial systems, it's a little bit longer, but it's still, we're talking about an hour or 90 minutes. We don't want to spend 6 months configuring playbooks because we don't have playbooks. That's not how it works. It's sort of like it's out of the box in a way where you just sort of plug it in, send the data feeds into the AI, and it's autonomously going to learn those normal behaviors. So we usually give it a week after the installation before we sit back down together and sort of walk through the initial things that we see, and sort of we can, you go away and have a look around it and see if it's intuitive, if you like to use it, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's the idea is that it's extremely low, not low effort, that's the wrong term, but low cost in terms of setting up. And the value of the trial itself is just, you can highlight any existing malware we might pick up on. In a number of the proof of value trials I've done, we've picked up on either there was crypto mining going on somewhere unknown, or there was beaconing going out, someone that had hidden in the network, or it can be something as simple as a patient at a hospital access the internal internal network via the guest Wi-Fi. No damage sort of ensued, but it highlighted a door that should absolutely not be open, kind of thing. So there's value in that in itself, if that answers your question.
It does, thanks, Elliot. Just very quickly, because I can see that time is passing us by, and I want to pick up on a couple of questions that have been asked whilst this webinar has been going on. But very, very quickly, just in 20 seconds, 30 seconds maximum, looking at what's going to happen in the cyber landscape in 2023, which is nearly here now. Can't believe we're just 8 weeks now to 8 weeks to Christmas already. So what sort of things should we be looking out for, and how best are we going to be able to prepare ourselves for that? 20, 30 seconds.
So the just to shoot through them, I think identity abuse is still something that's here to stay. MFA was sort of the heralded as the solution to credential harvesting, credential abuse, and things like that. And attackers found a way around it with a couple of recent attacks that we've seen in the news, whether at a specific organization or going after the MFA provider itself. So that's definitely something that, zero trust is not a binary. You put a tool in place and then there's zero trust. It's a mindset. It's a journey. Forgive me for this sort of spiritual language, but it really is a sort of a set of reflexes of assuming zero trust rather than implementing zero trust. Ransomware turns to the cloud. That's going to be a big thing as well, and that's just following the way organizations are moving to the cloud. But interestingly, the changes that might lead to are we're looking at more data exfiltration rather than encryption. So there's things to look there. But obviously, yeah, keep having protection that can extend to the cloud is of course crucial while getting the context from the rest of the environment. And maybe I have 5, but I'll just stick to 3. The last one is budget tightening. The sort of current economic situation is that CIOs and boards like that are going to be asking for more ROI on security tools. And one of the things that is going to be important is not so much on demonstrating that you could stop an attack when it came, that one day out of 365, but how are you demonstrating value day to day? How is this tool actively helping us bolster and harden our cybersecurity posture from one day to the next and not just waiting for us to be attacked and block it? That was way more than 20-30 seconds, but I'll stop there.
It was, but I will forgive you, Elliot. So that's fine. Let me just cover some of the questions that we've been asked. So is Darktrace a fully automated system powered by machine learning, or does it require IT input?
I'm just having a think on sort of what Usama means by that. So basically, it's fully automated in the sense that once you send in the data feeds into it, the AI is going to autonomously learn the normal behaviors, do the processing, the analysis that leads to the investigation and the creation of reports if there is something going on. And same thing for the response in terms of either suggesting or taking it, depending on the configuration. Now, where the IT team has an input is obviously initially setting it up and getting all the data feeds in there, but then it's all about configuration. So what does your typical workflow look like today? Do you have a ticketing system where your alerts go through, or things like that, and whether or not you want to fit in the tool to integrate with other solutions? We have an open and flexible architecture. So sort of fitting Darktrace into what you already have. That will require some IT input, obviously with the help of Darktrace. And the other thing is how you want to use it. So particularly for the autonomous response, a lot of IT teams that I worked with sort of had the autonomous response on human confirmation mode from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, sorry. So you basically get a ping from Darktrace saying, hey, I just saw a device, I don't know, beaconing, or it's doing this, that, and the other. I want to block it. Can I? Yes, no. And so that just makes the whole time from detection to decision made, for basically real time. But then from 5 to 9, so outside of work hours, on weekends, things like that, you might want to have it in autonomous mode. And so sort of playing with those settings and configurations on, when and where the AI is taking action, that is something you can do. But with regards to building the pattern of behavior, doing the whole investigation process and taking a response, that is fully autonomous.
Okay, that's great. Samara, hopefully that answers your question there. If you want to talk about that in any further depth, then we'd be more than happy to have another conversation with you. Some of you ask another question regarding someone accessing the internal network through guest Wi-Fi. Does this mean Darktrace can detect vulnerabilities in the environment similarly to a penetration test?
Much appreciated, Usama. You're actually going to help me touch on the last bit of Darktrace that I didn't have a chance to touch on before, which is prevent. So prevent, detect, respond, and heal form the Darktrace cyber AI loop. So it's basically 4 AI engines that all communicate with each other. Zooming into prevent, the whole idea there is to look at an organization from the inside and the outside as if we were an attacker. So it separates into 2, attack surface management and end-to-end. And attack surface management is really going to look at, okay, from the outside, what is all the information I could find or that a dedicated attacker could find after some extensive research. So any internet-facing ports, any known vulnerabilities is one, but more importantly, it's vulnerabilities that are relevant to you. So it's not just a list of industry vulnerabilities that you have to work your way through. They're actually prioritized depending on sort of what we can see of your environment. It's going to pick up any sort of malicious infrastructure, so any domains that are doing, that looks similar to yours that might be used in a phishing campaign, and things like that. So really picking up on the attack surface and the outside, and then end-to-end is going to leverage that same understanding of normal, if you will, to look at the inside. And so what we're doing there is we're saying, okay, let's assume an attacker had perfect information and knew exactly how my environment is. How could he get to my crown jewels? And that's a way to test your security controls, basically. And so it doesn't work exactly in the same way as a pen test because it's being done at the speed and scale of AI. Again, I keep touching on speed and scale, but there are really two important things to consider. It's basically AI dreaming of all the possible ways it could get into your environment and into your crown jewels, whereas a pen test is usually limited A, by knowledge that you give them, and B, by time, and therefore budget, obviously, by extension. So it's not a sort of a replacement for a pen test. It actually can augment the pen test in a number of ways, because if you're giving basically an attacker the best tool to attack you, that's a great way to test your security controls and sort of validate that you've got everything in place, should an attacker come in with perfect information. I hope that helped answer. Of course, if we can dive into this in more detail at another time.
Yeah, certainly. And our last question before we close down: how does Darktrace differ from an endpoint protection solution such as CrowdStrike?
So there's two things. One is always, as I said, about considering different sort of AI solutions. One is always considering the input. So really, Darktrace is looking at normal behavior across the environment, and we're really not looking at sort of historical attack data. And the other is going to be the broad scope. So Darktrace is not sort of an NDR or an EDR or a CASB or whatever. It's a solution that is going to try and go and fit and try and go and get data from wherever the organization has it. So the endpoint will be included in that, but we're not just sort of centered on the endpoint with that sort of view into the network, because we're also in the network, we're also in Microsoft 365, and that's crucial when you have an attack that's going to migrate across those to have the full picture. And as we discussed, it's about detecting subtle signals at every step. The more steps you're covering, the more chance you have of picking on multiple subtle signals, and the more chance you have of uncovering the overall incident narrative and not ending up in a pickle.